Okay, so, like, picture this. You're just driving down the road, maybe listening to your favorite playlist, not really thinking about anything much. But up above you, there's this camera, and it takes a picture of your license plate. And it's recording your car, where it is, and what time it is. Can you imagine if that was happening everywhere you went?
Yeah.
Well, that's the situation in Norfolk, Virginia right now. And there's this lawsuit against the city that's making people ask some big questions about, privacy in this digital world that we live in. You sent over some really interesting articles and legal documents about this case, and wow, it's going to be a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it looks that way.
I've got expert speaker here to help us understand all the legal stuff, explain how these license plate readers actually work, and really explore what it all means for you. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, so we're talking about Norfolk, Virginia. It's a city of about 238,000 people, and all of a sudden, they've got 172 license plate readers watching them. And it gets even crazier. They're planning on putting in 65 more. I know, right? You might be thinking, okay, so they're catching people speeding. What's the big deal? But these cameras, they're not just looking for traffic violations. They're creating this whole database of everywhere we drive. Every time you go by, your car is being logged. It's like a digital trail of your movements.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. You've got these two people in Norfolk, Lee Schmidt, who's a Navy veteran, and Crystal Arrington, who is a caregiver. They're the ones who are leading this lawsuit. And their argument is that this constant tracking without a warrant goes against their Fourth Amendment rights.
Okay, so for those of us who might not be constitutional law experts, can you give us a quick refresher on that Fourth Amendment thing? How does it apply here?
Sure. So basically, the Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures, right?
Right.
So the argument in this case is that when the city is constantly tracking where drivers go without any reason to think they did something wrong, that's basically like searching them. And doing that without a warrant, well, that violates their reasonable expectation of privacy.
That makes sense, especially if you think about someone like Crystal Arrington, who's driving her elderly clients all over Norfolk to appointments and such. It's not even just her privacy at stake. It's also the privacy of the people that she's caring for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important point. This case isn't just about one person's right to privacy. It's about what it means for the whole community, especially people who might be more vulnerable.
Now, this case gets even trickier because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a case recently in Baltimore about the police using drones for, surveillance?
Yeah.
And didn't the court say that was unconstitutional?
You're exactly right. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes Virginia, ruled against that drone program. They said it did violate the Fourth Amendment.
Interesting.
The court's reasoning was that because the drones were constantly recording everyone's movements, they were basically carrying out these random searches without any real probable cause.
Hmm. So is it like they're saying what you can't do from the air, you also can't do from the ground? Is that the argument they're making here?
It's a really interesting legal question. Can the government legally use these license plate readers, which are on the ground, to do what they couldn't do with drones in the air? That's what makes this case so important. It could set a precedent for how this technology is used all over the country.
Wow. Talk about high stakes. So if the people suing are saying it's unconstitutional, what's the other side of the story? What's Norfolk's defense? And what about the company that actually makes these cameras, Flock Safety? What's their take?
So Flock Safety says that their technology doesn't violate anyone's privacy. Their reasoning is that license plates are public information.
Okay.
They say that since license plates are designed for identification and they're right there on your car for everyone to see, drivers don't really have an expectation of privacy when it comes to their plates.
So it's like saying, hey, if your license plate's visible, you've already given up your privacy. Is that really how it works, though? I mean, I can see that argument working if a police officer writes down your license plate after seeing you run a red light. But what about these cameras recording every single car that drives by?
That is exactly the point this lawsuit is trying to make. Where do we draw the line? This technology has gone way beyond just writing down a license plate number. Flock Safety themselves say they're collecting over 1 billion plate reads every single month across 5,000 communities.
1 billion.
That's a crazy amount of data, and it brings up some serious questions about how much surveillance is happening in this digital age.
1 billion plate reads a month. That's just mind-blowing. But, I mean, to be fair, Flock Safety probably argues that they're helping to solve crimes, right? What's the city's stance on all of this?
Well, Norfolk's official statement is that these cameras are there to, and I quote, enhance citizen safety. They say this tech can be really useful for solving crimes. especially when it comes to stolen cars or Amber Alerts. And, I mean, they're not wrong. There have been cases where this technology has helped to find missing people or catch suspects.
So it sounds like we're looking at a classic balancing act here, weighing the potential benefits of this tech for keeping people safe against the potential cost to our privacy.
Exactly. And to make things even more complicated, Flock's technology doesn't just stop at reading license plates. They've developed something called vehicle fingerprinting technology.
Okay, vehicle fingerprinting. That sounds kind of creepy. What exactly is that? Are they dusting our cars for fingerprints when we're not looking?
Not quite, but it is pretty high tech. So on top of the license plates, this system, it logged details about your car itself, like the make, the model, what color it is, even things like bumper stickers or if you have a roof rack.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it creates this searchable database. It's way beyond just, figuring out what kind of car it is.
Hold on. So if I have like a Save the Whales bumper sticker on my car, they can search for all the cars with that specific sticker. And then what? Someone could use that to track my movements.
Yeah, that's a big part of what the lawsuit is getting at. Flock Safety says, no, no, no. The images and the data, they're only used for, real law enforcement purposes. But the people who are suing, they're arguing that this level of detail, it's basically a record of people's activities, who they hang out with, all of that. It goes way further than just simple vehicle identification.
It sounds like what we're talking about is the ability to track where anyone's going, what rallies they go to, maybe even who they go with, all because of this data. That's kind of messed up if you think about it.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, what is reasonable surveillance these days? Is this technology, with all this detailed information it gathers, is it crossing a line? Those are some of the tough questions the courts are trying to answer right now.
It feels like a slippery slope to me. But let's get back to the lawsuit. Didn't you say there was that case in Kansas where someone supposedly misused this tech? What was that about?
Oh, right. The lawsuit talks about an incident in Kansas where apparently a police chief used Flock's system to, get this, track his ex-girlfriend. It's
Huh.
important to remember this is still an allegation at this point.
Wow.
And the case is ongoing, but it shows you just how easily this technology could be misused.
That's really disturbing. And it proves that even if these systems are supposed to be used for good, there's always a chance someone could abuse them. It makes you think, what kind of rules are there to prevent that sort of thing?
That's a really crucial question, and it's something that's being debated right now. The lawsuit argues that because Norfolk doesn't have any clear rules about how the police can access and use this data, that's a big problem. They're saying that without strong regulations and someone keeping an eye on things, the risk of misuse is way too high.
So it's all about transparency and accountability, right? Like if cities are going to use this tech, people need to know exactly how it's being used, who can see that data, and what they can do if they think it's being misused.
Exactly. That's what the lawsuit is pushing for. More transparency and accountability with how this technology is used. And it's not even just about the police, right? The data collected by these cameras can end up being shared with other agencies or even private companies, which makes the risk of misuse even greater.
That's a great point. We always focus on the government watching us, but we can't forget about companies. They're gathering mountains of data on us all the time, and often we don't even know about it.
That's right. And that data, it's incredibly valuable, both for totally legit reasons like those targeted ads you see, and for shadier things like tracking our movements or even trying to predict how we're going to behave.
It's kind of freaky when you think about it. Like, we're headed toward a world where every little thing we do is tracked and recorded. What does that even mean for our sense of privacy, our freedom to just be?
That's a big question that philosophers and ethicists are really struggling with right now. As technology gets more advanced and surveillance is everywhere, we've got to have a serious conversation about what kind of society we want to live in. Do you want to live in a world where they're watching and analyzing our every move, where the lines between public and private are totally blurred? We as a society have to decide.
You're right. It goes beyond technology. It's about our values. It's about what we're willing to sacrifice to feel safe. But going back to this Norfolk case, there just don't seem to be any easy answers.
Yeah, it's tough. There are strong arguments on both sides. On one hand, you've got this technology that could help solve crimes and keep people safe. But on the other, you've got these real concerns about privacy and the possibility of it being abused. At the end of the day, it's up to the courts to figure out if the way Norfolk's using these license plate readers actually violates the Fourth Amendment.
And no matter what they decide, this case could have a huge impact on how surveillance technology is used all across the country. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. And speaking of keeping an eye on things, let's talk more about this vehicle fingerprinting stuff. You mentioned it logs bumper stickers, and now I'm curious, what else can it pick up?
That's a great question, and it's one of the big reasons people are so torn about this technology. Because it's not just about knowing what kind of car you drive, it's about using your car to create a whole profile about you.
Mm.
So, besides the obvious stuff, make, model, color, the system can also pick up on things like if you have any dents or scratches on your car, even custom stuff you've done to it.
So, like if I got a little fender bender and I just decided, yeah, I'm not going to fix that dent, that becomes part of my car's permanent record, so to speak.
Basically, yeah. And, I mean, on its own, that doesn't sound like a big deal. But when you combine that with everything else they're collecting your license plate, the date, the time, where your car was scanned, it all adds up.
Yeah.
It starts to create a really detailed picture of your life.
Okay, now I see what you're saying. It's not just about catching bad guys. This tech could be used to track anyone's movements, figure out their routines, who they spend time with, maybe even figure out their beliefs, which is kind of scary.
You got it. And that's what makes this technology so potentially intrusive. It's not about whether you have something to hide. It's about them using all this information to make assumptions about you, assumptions that might be totally wrong or even hurtful.
Right. And it brings up even more ethical questions, like what if all this data gets into the wrong hands? What if it's used to discriminate against certain people or to shut down anyone who disagrees with them?
Those are real possibilities.
Right.
And that's why we need some seriously strong rules to protect our privacy and our freedoms in this age of big data.
You're preaching to the choir here. We can't just sit back and let technology run wild without considering what it means for us as human beings.
I couldn't agree more. This isn't some abstract tech issue. This is about us. This is about the
Yeah.
kind of future we want to live in.
Absolutely. We all have a part to play in figuring out the role of technology in our lives and making sure it serves us, not the other way around. But before we get too deep into that rabbit hole, let's circle back to the Norfolk case. What are the potential outcomes here? What could this mean for the future of license plate readers, not just in Norfolk, but everywhere?
Well, there are a few different ways this could go. The court could side with the people who are suing and say that the way Norfolk is using these license plate readers does violate the Fourth Amendment.
And what happens then? Would the city have to get rid of all their license plate readers?
It's definitely possible. If the plaintiffs win, Norfolk might have to cut back on how much they use these license plate readers. Or they might have to create stricter rules, like maybe needing a warrant for certain searches or setting limits on how long they can keep the data. And it could even lead to more lawsuits like this in other places.
So this case could change how surveillance technology is used all across the country. Pretty big stuff.
Absolutely. But there's another side to this too. The court could also rule in favor of the city. They could say that Norfolk's license plate reader program is perfectly constitutional.
And what would that mean?
Well, that would be a huge win for law enforcement. It would back up their argument that this technology is super valuable for doing their jobs and keeping us safe.
But even if the city wins, this whole case has already got people thinking and talking about privacy in our digital world, right? It feels like a lot of people are worried about how much surveillance is happening and what it means for all of us.
Oh, for sure. And that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's not just about license plate readers. It's about finding that balance between security and freedom. It's about the role of technology in democracy. And it's about whether we have a right to privacy as the world becomes more and more connected.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. We can't just sit back and let other people decide these things for us. Technology is always changing, right? It's up to us as citizens to talk about how this technology is being used and how it affects our lives. We got to ask the tough questions, demand transparency, make sure our voices are heard, all of that.
100%. This isn't just a job for politicians or tech companies to figure out. This affects all of us. So to everyone listening, I hope this deep dive gave you a lot to think about. What do you think about license plate readers in your own community? Are there enough rules in place to protect your privacy? These are definitely questions worth asking, especially the next time you see one of those cameras flashing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of surveillance technology. Until next time, stay curious.